All right, this is Andrew Johns doing his storyboarding, index carding kind of assignment for games of narratology. So I have my story kind of laid out here in these 7 columns, top to bottom, and then left to right across. Um, it's it's distinctly nonlinear structured. They're not in the same way as maybe um, composition number 1 or the Unfortunates, where you have each independent section could stand alone as its own mini story. It is clear that like all of these chunks are part of like a greater story, and they all have like very obvious recurring characters. Not a lot of beating around the bush like composition number 1. So yeah, let's kind of get into it. So the story starts up here at the top. Hopefully these are all readable. Ian wakes up. He goes to work. He is at his normal routine. Everything seems normal, and that's kind of where we're at. Is we're starting with this status quo, the normalcy, and then we're breaking out of that almost immediately. Quick cut to his son and daughter talking about that bastard emailed you. He had the nerve to email you. And it's disorienting, and that's kind of what I'm going for. It's a kind of common thread throughout the story is that it's just disorienting. Like what happened to these characters and like what has gone on is like a whirlwind. It's disorienting, it blends together. Things are out of order, they don't make sense. And I want to kind of put the player in that mindset of like trying to piece together what happened to this event. So it jumps straight from eating breakfast, going to work, it's very forgettable, to that bastard emailed you. And at this point, we don't even know that the him referring to is Ian. It's just they're talking about it. So it cuts back to Ian, his normal life, driving home, wondering how he can possibly get out of this loop of doing the same thing every day, day in and day out. And again, just jumping back and forth, and then back again. Here in a minute, he starts packing, not rushing, moving with purpose. He grabs everything that's his that he thinks he might need and carries it out to his kitchen. So the player's kind of wondering, what's going on? Like, what's the deal? What's he doing? And we'll get there, but not before more discussion between the son and daughter. And again, I don't know, I'm just telling you what happened, do with it what you will. He shouldn't come try and visit Dad. And so it it kind of sets up a little bit more, like what's going on, who these characters are, what their relationships are, and it kind of puts that what Ian's going to do is severe enough that like he shouldn't come back, or at least Lewis thinks that he shouldn't come back. And we get that right next as Ian writes his farewell note, which, is telling his husband Jesse that he doesn't really know how to fix what's broken, and he's afraid, and he's struggling, and so he just decides to leave. He makes a rash decision, leaves it all behind, for better or worse. And this is like a lot to kind of grapple with, being dumped on you all at once. And then we cut back to stuff that doesn't seem to make much sense. It's Lewis outside their house getting a hospital bill for 3 days in the hospital and therapy appointments, thinking his lucky stars that Jesse had insurance, and he wondered if Ian had the first clue how much damage he did. Would he even do anything if he knew? And it does kind of contrast like how Lewis feels directly with how Ian feels. It's kind of running counter. Like it's showing Lewis's storyline kind of going backwards from the end and running parallel to Ian's storyline, which is kind of jumbled up. And then the combination, like the way that the closure, the things in between are the relationship. That's the relationship through line comes through there. So Ian grabs his stuff, puts it all in his car, and opens his phone and puts in Kansas City, Missouri, and hits navigate. Now, the locations are a little bit significant, but not a whole lot. In this case, it's just to serve to be even more disorienting, because you expect that, oh, he puts in Kansas City, the next place he'll end up is in Kansas City. Well, that's not true. But first, we get an email from Jamie from earlier when she was talking about responding, relaying the message, and that bastard emailed her. She emails back. And she doesn't say this above part, cut that out, but, hey, Dad. She said, all's well, talks about the family a little bit, how they're a little bit resentful, and that kind of cuts off. And again, so here we've got Ian driving down the street, and he slows down and stops, and he wonders if this is the right decision to make. So at this point, Ian's story is still kind of in order, and this is about where that order kind of ends. This is where it all kind of blurs together, where this period of time where he's away will just kind of all run together, and there's not a lot he can do to really sort it out. So he flips back to the email, and Jamie writes to tell him that she understands, like, she gets where he's coming from. She doesn't approve of his methods, but she does understand the feeling that of being trapped, of being afraid, of being fearful about what might happen to you if nothing changes, if nothing ever changes. And that also establishes her kind of relationship to him over the course of the story as like the kind of foil to Lewis, who is very angry and resentful, whereas she is kind of more empathetic, not forgiving yet, but empathetic, like she does understand what he's going through. So now we get the location trickery. He's driving through some Mountain West town. It looks nothing like, in a perfect world, it looks nothing like Kansas City or Chicago, just to completely disorient the player again. And he gives us a bit of dialogue about how he hasn't been able to stay in the same place too long, which again doesn't make a lot of sense considering he's just left. But there's the time scrambling going on again. And Lewis, kind of walking backwards through his timeline, realizes that he could track Ian's phone and figure out where he is, and he can't. He leaves this sentiment on whether it's something to warn them so they can throw a welcome back party, or an early warning system to protect Jesse. He's not sure at this point, but you can definitely tell that like he's concerned about where Ian is and whether he's coming back, for better or worse. So this is one of the first other scenes of Ian being pictured in his car about to pick the next destination, and he, in this case, time has jumped forward again. He looks very like disheveled, and he's in California somewhere, and he picks Mesa, Arizona as his destination. Again, completely jumping around. Cut to suddenly driving through the Pacific Northwest and then down the Northern California coast. Makes no sense, and that's not a logical leap, but he thinks about how long he's been gone and how much he's missing. And the he in this one is this is back to Lewis emailing his professors about what had happened, and that he jumped in his car and made it to Evanston, to a hospital where his father was before lunch, and he was able to be there for him, and he vowed to do whatever it took to help his dad get through it. Ian exits the freeway at a sign marking UC Berkeley. He finds a place to park nearby, pulls out some leftovers, he goes to eat on the grass, and he sees some students who are about to graduate, and he thinks to himself that he's going to miss Jamie's graduation. She's a senior in college, and it's very likely at this point that she's going to graduate soon, and he won't be there. And this also harkens back to the email that Jamie sent earlier, where she says that she'd like him to be there. She doesn't know if it's possible, but she'd like him to be there. Again, kind of like weird reverse foreshadowing, but it even though the email is sent after this happens, it foreshadows this kind of realization where he's going to figure out that, oh shit, like, I'm going to miss that. I'm not going to be in those pictures. Like, and that hits him pretty hard. So this one, Lewis standing outside the hospital room. He's filled out online applications for incompletes and was calling to follow up with his administration. And he knows it'll impact his summer, but it's worth it to him. Family is everything. And this is where Lewis kind of has his thesis statement of what he really values, and that it is his family over everything. And it contrasts Ian's kind of very self-centered decision to just up and leave. And so you get those two kind of playing off of each other, another major signpost, as it were, in their relationship through line, and in Lewis's through line as well. So now Ian's back in Kansas City. He checks in, and again, his appearance changes back to, relatively clean, first day out on the road kind of thing. He has a conversation with the clerk, and during that conversation, it's not noted here, but in the script, he would stumble and ask for a room for two, and then realize he means a room for one. Still thinking about previous vacations he's taken with Jesse and how much that they spent all their time together. And other than that, it's a pretty mundane interaction. So back up again to Lewis. He gets a call from a hospital saying that his father checked in and said he couldn't eat or sleep. And Lewis says, when they ask if they can think of anything that might have caused it, he says yes, and he decides he's going to pay them a visit, which again is, reverse foreshadowing. He kind of already knew that was going to happen. And again, camera fades in on him sitting in his car looking like a wizened old man somewhere in Oregon. He picks Berkeley, California, which is a place he's already been. And again, this is the whole weird time thing coming in, just kind of disorienting the player continuously with this. So now he's driving down the Midwest countryside on his way presumably to Kansas City. We get his thoughts. He realizes that it's more silent when he's alone. Like, it didn't matter how much he turned up the radio or how loud the wind was, that he could never really replace the presence that Jesse had in his life. And that's kind of the first stepping stone for him to realize the gravity of what he's done, but he doesn't actually, like, it's not the first in the story order, but it's the first in his chronological journey. And I don't know if I could say any of the steps is more important than any of the others, but it is, so, which is why they're kind of scrambled up, but it is the first one. We back up again to Jamie being very panicked when she wakes up and realizes that her dad, Jesse, has left a voicemail and had a bunch of missed calls, and she calls him right back, and Jesse tells her the news that Ian has left home, has run away with all of his stuff in his car, and abandoned him. And she you can already see, she is more of the devil's advocate. She's more willing to admit that he had a good reason. And Jesse just responds, "I sure hope so." And he's clearly not as convinced as she is, but she is very much willing to see it both sides, see it both ways, not play emotional hardball as much as her dad Jesse or Lewis. And then we have Ian pulling into Cheyenne, stopping in a local diner. The waiter ends up reminding him of Jesse, and they talk for a while, and again he has to kind of hide the fact that that he left him, and it does contribute to making him feel the weight of his actions again. He can't, even in this weird little diner where no one knows his name and he's miles away from anyone he's ever known. His actions have followed him all the way out here. Back up again to Lewis seeing the call, and he answers right away. He calls right back to Jesse, and in this case you can tell like Jesse is a bit more panicked, a bit more emotional than when he calls Jamie the next morning. He's a bit more composed, and you see Lewis's emotions come out at the end, remarking what a fucking child when he learns that his father has basically run away from home. And it does put it in perspective. It is kind of a childlike thing to do. It's a very like knee-jerk rage reaction, and Lewis kind of calls it like he sees it, and calls him out on his behavior. So, and then of course back up to Jamie and Lewis getting the same voicemail a few minutes apart, and the camera cuts back and forth between the unanswered phones, playing the voicemail audio of Jesse absolutely having a meltdown, which is warranted. I mean, I would have a meltdown if my husband just up and left me out of nowhere, leaving only a note. And yeah, this is like one of the big moments. This is the kind of thing that gets the ball rolling, despite the fact that it's near the end. You start to put all the pieces together and realize like what has actually gone on here. Another shot of Ian sitting in his car, looking a little worse for wear, but not terrible, somewhere in South Dakota, and he picks Cheyenne, Wyoming, and then it flashes forward to him driving through the Sierra Nevada mountains between California and Arizona. And this is finally, this is kind of when you realize it's all going to wrap up here soon. The weight of everything came crashing down, and I knew I wouldn't be able to stand it anymore. It was all I could hope that in some way it wasn't too late for me to change. And this is like Ian has finally, through all the things that have happened in the past, realized that he needs to change, that he can't be like this anymore, and that even though it's been 2 years, like, that he still has the power to make a decision to not live this way anymore. And almost to counterpoint this positive decision, Jesse pulls up outside his house on the same day that Ian left and walks inside, seeing his car is gone and seeing the note on the table, and reads it and breaks down. Just to kind of give like a nice counterpoint to Ian's kind of revelation that what he did was wrong. It really like drives that home. So, and then we cut back to Ian pulling off the freeway, finding a coffee shop, sitting down, and typing out the email that Jamie mentions in the beginning of the game, saying that, he messed up. There's no two ways about it. It's the worst decision he's ever made. He can't expect forgiveness now or any time, but he hopes that they can still forgive him. And he really just wants to know what's happened. He has gotten some emails, phone calls that he hasn't returned that maybe suggest that like their perspectives have all changed, and that's kind of it. And he finishes the email, signs it off. He closes his laptop. The player chooses the destination one last time, and it's Evanston, which is home. He clicks go, and the screen cuts to black, and that's it. We don't get anything more out of that. So, yeah, you can kind of see like the through lines kind of weaving themselves together. The order is a bit nonsensical and disorienting, but that's kind of the MO of it, is to have to make the player kind of put all the puzzle pieces together and figure out what was happening. And all of the characters kind of interact with each other. Ian has his through line of realizing in all of these different little ways as he's gone, finally realizing what he had now that it's gone. You have Jamie as the counterpoint to Lewis, who is very angry and obviously values his family very much, and is absolutely baffled that someone could just abandon their family without thinking about it like that. And Jamie understands a bit more, and then all of the locations, all of the places that he goes, all of the things that he does kind of come into the overarching storyline, like the overarching through line that kind of drives the story forward, both metaphorically and literally in this case. And yeah, I think that's about it. Sorry that this is a 20-minute long ramble. Good luck, good God, I'm very sorry for rambling on this long. But yeah, that's my story, Driven, in a nutshell. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.